Woodruff on the NewsHour tonight.
I was going to fire.
A lot of guys who feel either because of their friends or their community or because of themselves, like when they take one of these jobs, that they are doing something girly.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by BNSF Railway
and by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, supporting science, technology, and improved economic performance and financial literacy in the 21st century.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and the advancement of international peace and security at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
It was another day in Washington that generated more questions than answers, with apparently conflicting statements coming from the White House, fueling the firestorm surrounding the dismissal of the former FBI director. And our William Brangham reports.
President Trump came out swinging today. In an interview with NBC's Lester Holt, the president laid into James Comey, the man he fired just 2 days ago.
Look, he's a showboat. He's a grandstander. The FBI has been in turmoil. You know that. I know that. Everybody knows that.
Those remarks came as the man who's now filling in for Comey, acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe, painted a starkly different picture of his former boss.
I hold Director Comey in the absolute highest regard. I have the highest respect for his considerable abilities and his integrity, and it has been the greatest privilege and honor of my professional life to work with him. I can tell you also that Director Comey enjoyed broad support within the FBI and still does to this day.
McCabe spoke at a Senate hearing today to discuss various global threats, but Democrats spared little time blasting the president for his dismissal of Comey, who had been scheduled for this same hearing.
President Trump's actions this week cost us an opportunity to get at the truth, at least for today.
For his part, McCabe pledged that the ongoing FBI investigation into Russian meddling in the election and whether Trump's team colluded in that meddling will continue no matter what.
The work of the men and women of the FBI continues despite any changes in circumstance, any decisions. So there has been no effort to impede our investigation to date. Quite simply put, sir, you cannot stop the men and women of the FBI from doing the right thing, protecting the American people, and upholding the Constitution.
McCabe added he won't be updating the president on that Russia investigation. Senators pressed him about Mr. Trump's claim that Comey had told the president he was not personally under investigation. McCabe said he couldn't comment on the specific conversations between the two men. Republican Susan Collins of Maine followed up.
Is it standard practice for the FBI to inform someone that they are not a target of an investigation?
It is not.
Meanwhile, in that same NBC interview, the president doubled down on that claim, saying Comey told him 3 times that he wasn't a target.
He said it once at dinner, and then he said it twice during phone calls.
Did you call him?
In one case I called him, in one case he called me.
And did you ask, am I under investigation?
I actually asked him, yes. I said, if it's possible, would you let me know, am I under investigation? He said, you are not under investigation.
Mr. Trump also said he had decided to fire Comey long before meeting with Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein on Monday.
I was going to fire Comey. My decision. It was not.
You had made the decision before they came in the room.
I was going to fire Comey. There's no good time to do it, by the way.
Because in your letter you said I
around.
accepted their recommendation, so you had already made the decision.
I was going to fire regardless.
But that seemed to contradict what senior White House officials had been saying all week. Press Secretary Sean Spicer, Vice President Mike Pence, and Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders had all indicated that the firing was driven largely by concerns from the Justice Department. But news reports had suggested otherwise. And the Washington Post reported last night Rosenstein threatened to resign after the White House cast him as the prime mover of the decision to fire Comey. At today's press briefing, Sanders offered a justification for the seeming inconsistencies.
I think it's pretty simple. I hadn't had a chance to have the conversation directly with the president. I've since had the conversation with him right before I walked on today, and he laid it out very clearly. He had already made that decision, and the recommendation that he got from the Deputy Attorney General just further solidified his decision.
Meanwhile, outrage over Comey's ouster stretched beyond Washington. Lawmakers, including New Jersey's Tom MacArthur, have seen vocal opposition at town hall meetings to the president's action.
We need an independent prosecutor. We need a bipartisan select committee to investigate this. When are you going to open your eyes? We all see it.
And I hear you, but there are loads of other people who don't see it that way. That's the reality.
Despite those calls, there have been few signs so far that a special counsel will be named. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
And we get more now from the White House and from Capitol Hill from our own John Yang and Lisa Desjardins. Lisa, I'm going to start with you. You were at the hearing today where James Comey's successor, at least for the time being, Andrew McCabe, we just heard a little bit from him, his first public appearance, I guess, in less than 48 hours after this whole thing came down. What stood out to you from this hearing?
Quite a day, huh? On his third day on the job, Andrew McCabe was in front of Senate Intelligence Committee members, and for the most part, Judy, he was non-controversial. But when asked about his former boss, FBI James Comey, McCabe said this: he defended him as a man of integrity who McCabe said enjoys broad support in the FBI to this day. That's important because it directly counters what the White House has said. They said that Comey was undermining morale at the agency. Minutes after McCabe said that, the Senate Intelligence Chairman, Republican Richard Burr, came out, also defended Comey. That became a theme, Judy. I spoke to several Republican senators who today felt they had to defend Comey's reputation against attacks from the White House. Meanwhile, as Republicans were doing that, one Democratic senator on the Intelligence Committee, Kamala Harris of California, came out and said she thinks Jeff Sessions should resign over his role in the Comey firing. Now, all of this, what's it mean? Basically, Judy, I saw the dial move away from the president's position for both Republicans and Democrats today.
And meantime, John, from the White House, the timeline on exactly what happened seemed to be shifting, and the explanation seemed to be shifting a little day.
It didn't just seem to shift, Judy. It shifted. They first said that this all happened on Tuesday, that the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General came to the president with this recommendation, which he accepted on the spot. Then we learned that actually there was a meeting on Monday at which this was discussed. And then it turns out, as the president said in the interview, and as Sarah Huckabee Sanders said in the briefing today, this was actually something in the president's mind from last week when he watched the James Comey's testimony on the Hill, also shifting where it came from. They originally said this was all Rod Rosenstein's idea. Now the president and his advisors acknowledge he had made this decision before that meeting on Monday.
And Lisa, just quickly, interesting, there was a Republican at the Capitol today saying the president himself may not be under investigation.
Yeah, not just any Republican chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley. He says he wrote a letter saying he met with FBI Director Comey and that Comey shared with him who the targets were of the investigation as per his ranking on Judiciary Committee. Now, Grassley said he can't divulge who the targets are, but in a carefully worded statement, Judy, Grassley said nothing that Comey told him contradicts President Trump's statement that he's not under investigation. That's a double or triple negative, but essentially Grassley is indicating here that to his knowledge, the president is not under investigation.
And just finally, John, what are you hearing from the White House about whether what has happened is going to affect the pace of this Russia investigation?
Well, that's another thing that's evolved over the last couple of days, Judy. On Tuesday night, Sarah Huckabee Sanders said there is no there of the Russian investigation. She said it's time to move on, clearly indicating that the White House wanted it closed. But since then, and again today, she said any investigation that was going on Monday before Comey was fired is still going on today. They want the FBI to do what they think is proper and fit, and they say they want this investigation to continue, but to end as quickly as possible.
Well, I guess it doesn't get any more active at either place, at the Capitol or the White House. Thank you both. John Yang, Lisa Desjardins. And now to what all this means for the functioning and the stability of the Trump presidency. We turn to a man who has had a front row seat in the White House. Leon Panetta was chief of staff for President Bill Clinton. He then went on to serve as director of the CIA and Secretary of Defense in the Obama administration. Secretary Panetta, thank you for talking with us. So as somebody who's had a top job, the top job at the White House as chief of staff, as we said, at the Pentagon and the CIA, how do you read how this Comey episode has unfolded?
Well, it's a very confusing picture, obviously, because a number of reasons have been presented as to why it's happened. You know, deep down, there's no question that however it happened, and for whatever reasons it happened, that this has undermined the credibility of a very vital national security investigation. And somehow that credibility has to be restored.
How has it undermined that credibility?
It's undermined the credibility because obviously the FBI was investigating the whole issue of Russian interference in our election. And despite the various reasons that have been presented, there's no question that the president remains concerned about that Russian investigation. And tying that concern with the fact that he fired the FBI director, and in the way he fired the FBI director, clearly undermines the credibility of the investigation. Is the White House going to continue to try to influence the direction of that investigation? The key right now is for the Congress, for the Justice Department, for the President, to make sure they take steps to restore the credibility of that investigation by appointing a new director of the FBI who is fair and objective and credible. And I think they should also, frankly, give consideration to the appointment of a special prosecutor. Because the very fact that this president continued to ask the FBI director as to whether or not he was the subject of an investigation, when a president does that, it clearly is sending a signal that the White House is concerned about that investigation. Frankly, it has to be an independent investigation, and it cannot have or be influenced by the White House.
Are you saying, Secretary Panetta, that there's no way the American people can have confidence in this investigation unless there's an outside, independent special counsel?
Well, my concern is that when the president himself has asked the question about whether or not he's the target of an investigation, something, frankly, that, at least in my time, is unheard of, that a president would, in fact, ask if he is the target of an investigation. When the president does that, he clearly is sending a signal to what should be a very independent, fair, and objective investigation by the FBI. And the fact that he's raised that question tells me that whoever is going to be the next FBI director, whoever that is, will probably get the same question from the president at some point in time. And just because of that fact alone, I just think some kind of independent prosecutor, committee, commission, whatever it would be, but something that is independent of the White House and independent of political influence needs to take place in this matter.
How much does it matter that the president, that the White House is giving a different explanation for why this happened? They're saying it has to do with the fact that they say Director Comey wasn't running the FBI well. He was, and the way they say he mishandled the Hillary Clinton email situation.
Well, again, and I look back on my days as Chief of Staff to the President, I think when a major step like that is going to be taken, and clearly somebody should have informed the President that once you fire the FBI director, that there's going to be a huge backlash because of the investigation that's going on. That in the very least, the reasons for why he's firing him should have been set down so that everybody had the same talking points. And clearly that did not happen here. And the President again today said he had been thinking about firing Director Comey for a long period of time. So whatever reasons have been given in these last few days has only created greater confusion about just exactly why this happened.
Secretary Panetta, finally, and in just a few seconds, obviously you're a Democrat, but I know you talk to a lot of Republicans. How much difficulty do you think this president's facing in his own party?
Well, I think whether you're Republican or Democrat, there is an interest in conducting an investigation into this national security issue. We've had a foreign adversary try to interfere in our election. That's a serious matter, and it needs to be investigated. So I think the Republicans, as well as the Democrats, are interested in putting this back on a track where you have a fair and independent and objective investigation that determines what happened here, whether there was any collusion or not with the campaign, the Trump campaign, and what should be done to make sure it never happens again.
Former Secretary of Defense, former CIA Director, former White House Chief of Staff, Leon Panetta, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll get the perspective of two conservatives on how Mr. Trump's recent moves have divided the Republican Party a little later in the program. The president's decision to fire FBI Director Comey, the various rationales that are being given, and the interview the president gave today to NBC are again prompting many questions about the way Mr. Trump makes decisions and carries out his job as chief executive. A Time magazine team had a chance earlier this week to get a look at what life is like inside the Trump White House. Michael Shearer, Time's Washington bureau chief, was part of the group that met with the president, as it turned out, before the Comey firing. And he joins me now. Michael Shearer, welcome back to the NewsHour. You and the Time magazine folks had unusual access at the White House. Tell us about what it was like.
We got there about 6:30, and we were invited into the Oval Office, where he was meeting with a number of senior staff, signing the final orders of the day. And from there began a almost 3-hour, 2.5-hour evening in which he took us to many parts of the White House that most presidents never take the press. That included starting in his private dining room, which is just down the hallway from the Oval Office in the West Wing, where he played us some DVR clips of that day's Senate hearings with color commentary attached. And then we walked down the colonnade, and he took us in his elevator up to the residence on the second floor of the executive mansion and toured us through the rooms there. And it was followed by dinner in the Blue Room, which is the big oval room on the first floor of the residence.
What did you take away from this? I mean, I read the piece today, and you had, as you said, an extraordinary 2.5 hours with him. From the outside, this is a presidency that's almost bathed in controversy. Did you sense that kind of tension inside?
You know, there's an enormous amount of grievance he feels to the way he has been treated, and that was evident almost from the moment we got there. He was talking about how the press has mistreated them. Sometimes he included us in that, although he was also very gracious and hospitable, and talking about how his message had not gotten out, how the good things he had been doing were not being recognized. And he returned to that time and again. So there was a clear frustration, and at times he was very emotional. Even when he was watching the day's hearing, he was sort of mocking the witnesses, and these are former federal officials testifying before the Senate, because I think he's angry at the way the American people have been presented the story of his presidency.
What do you think he wanted to get across most to you?
I think he wanted to get that across. He wanted to make the case that his presidency is far more successful than has been recognized. There was an interesting moment where I asked him, do you think there's been too much conflict at the White House at some points? And he actually answered by saying, I think that may be true. And then he said, but you have to understand there's so much meanness out there. And then he reverted back to name calling of various other television correspondents and things like that. But I feel like he is someone who's trying to adjust his own personality, his own history, his own instincts to an office that is a very different structure around him. And I think he's waffling back and forth between the desire to lash out, to come back over the top, to confront, which has been actually very successful for him through his career, and the realities of the White House, which are that the president has enormous power, but he also is enormously limited in his power. That there are lots of institutions, the press, the courts, the Congress, that can constrain him.
It's interesting. I think you were telling us earlier today that it was almost like there were two operations going on at the same time. He has one operation around him to sort of protect him, make sure he's all right, protect his brand, you said. And then on the other hand, the operation to keep the business of the presidency going.
Yeah, he is enormously focused on his personal reputation and experience in office. And I think he spends a lot of time, watching TV at night, seeing how things are being digested. He's a incredibly erudite media critic, which we saw during the campaign. And that is really separate, I think, from what the business of the presidency is, which is running a very large and complicated government. Now, he's involved in those issues, too. It's not as if he's not engaged in the details of, getting Obamacare repeal through Congress or something like that. It's just that I think more than other presidents, he's spending a lot of time focused on this other thing. And he does have, staff around him who are essentially personal staff. They're not staff that are plugged into the hierarchy of a traditional White House. They're not reporting directly to the chief of staff, and they help him with that.
And any inkling, of course, this was Monday before we knew about the firing of the FBI director, any inkling something like that was coming down?
There was no discussion of the FBI director Comey. The only inkling was he returned several times to his frustration about the press not reporting that his wiretapping tweet of a few weeks ago saying that Barack Obama wiretapped me in Trump Tower, he still believes, he still argues was true, even though Director Comey testified that there was no evidence.
That he was wiretapped. He argues that happened.
And his argument is a little complicated. He's saying wiretapping was in quotes. It includes any unmasking by any officials of anyone in my campaign, which may have happened. And he believes that if an official was unmasked in a foreign intelligence tap, that would count as wiretapping. It's a stretch, but his anger at his feeling of being wronged by the way that's been discussed, and I think that includes what the FBI director said before Congress, was very apparent.
Michael Scherer of Time Magazine, fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you. Until this week, much of the country had never heard of Rod Rosenstein, but he has been thrust into the spotlight following the firing of James Comey. Late today, leaders of the Senate issued an unusual invitation to invite him to meet with all 100 senators. Margaret Warner brings us up to speed on the man charged with overseeing the investigation into Russia's interference in last year's presidential election.
The author of the fateful James Comey memo appeared on Capitol Hill today. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein met with the top Republican and Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Afterwards, they said Comey's firing was not discussed. But Democratic Vice Chair Mark Warner remains skeptical.
I think it was a productive session, but I still have concerns about Mr. Rosenstein in terms of his role in the Comey departure.
Rosenstein has said privately he did not initiate Comey's firing. Still, there are now nearly as many questions for the Justice Department's number 2 as there are for the ousted FBI director himself. Rosenstein graduated Harvard Law School in 1989. In 1997, he became an assistant U.S. attorney in Maryland. In 2005, President Bush appointed him the state's top federal prosecutor, a post he held until this year. In January, President Trump nominated him for Deputy Attorney General. At his hearing, senators of both parties praised him.
I know of no reason to question his judgment, his integrity, or his impartiality.
Rod Rosenstein has demonstrated throughout his long career the highest standards of professionalism.
The Judiciary Committee also received dozens of letters supporting his nomination. One, signed by more than 120 former U.S. attorneys, said Rosenstein, quote, epitomizes the ideal Department of Justice lawyer. He was confirmed 94-6. One no vote, Connecticut Democrat Richard Blumenthal, who said he'd use every possible tool to block any nominee for the position unless there was a special counsel assigned to the Russia investigation. Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself from the Russia probe in March. So when Rosenstein was sworn in 2 weeks ago, that authority fell to him. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Margaret Warner.
And now a closer look at what lies ahead for that Russia investigation. William Brangham is back with that.
Comey's firing has sparked accusations that the president is trying to derail the Russia investigation or at least exert more control over its direction. So where does that investigation go from here? Frank Montoya Jr. spent 26 years in the FBI. He oversaw national security and counterintelligence probes, and he joins us from Salt Lake City. And Amy Jeffress worked on national security investigations as counselor to former Attorney General Eric Holder and at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. Welcome to you both. Frank Montoya, I'd like to start with you. You've been talking with a lot of FBI agents. Give us a sense of how they are responding to Comey's firing.
You've heard a lot of, I think, descriptions already in terms of being stunned or gut punched. Those are, I think, apropos of the sense of, or the feeling that's in the organization right now. It really did come out of the blue, and they're struggling with it. But at the same time, they're all professionals at what they do. They know how to put the mission first, and they will continue to move forward.
Do any of the agents that you've spoken with believe that the firing was justified?
Absolutely not. This was, again, out of the blue. It was one of those things where, even amongst those few critics in the organization, the independence of the FBI, and Jim Comey represented that well. The independence of the FBI is utmost in their minds. It's the only way that they feel like they can go forward and do the work that they do.
Amy Jeffress, I'll turn to you. What was your reaction to Comey's firing?
I absolutely agree with what Frank just said and what Andy McCabe testified to in Congress today, which is that my perception is that Director Comey did have the confidence of the agency. And certainly the actions he took last summer and in the fall were controversial, and many people can criticize certain aspects of what he did. But I don't think anyone can say that he wasn't independent or that he wasn't trying to do what he perceived as the right thing at every step of the investigation. And my sense is that the agents really felt like he was supportive of them and that he would have their back and that he wanted to let them do their jobs professionally and independently. So I think morale is not good. Agents are disappointed at his firing, but I also agree with Frank that the agents will continue to do their jobs as best they can because that's their tradition.
Amy, what did you make of Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein's letter that cataloged a whole slew of criticisms of Comey's handling of the Hillary Clinton investigation?
Well, the letter contained some criticisms that I think many people would agree with. But on the other hand, I didn't see it as any real justification for Director Comey's firing. And I don't think that firing was handled in the way that any career Department of Justice prosecutor, which Rod Rosenstein is, would have liked to see it handled. It didn't go according to the process that should have been followed.
I'm going to ask you both this.
I agree on that one, by the way. I would like to interject there. I mean, this was really about independence, and that's where the rubber meets the road on this, and what is causing us a lot of concern right now within the FBI.
Frank, just sticking with you then, what does this mean for the ongoing Russia investigation? I mean, there's got to be a new head of the FBI put into place. What does this firing and the subsequent events mean for that probe?
Well, Andy McCabe put it very succinctly today. It will move forward. The men and the women of the FBI will do the right thing. They will continue in their mission, and that includes investigating the Russian interference into our democracy and all things associated with that. There is a lot of determination to get to the bottom of this. It was unfortunate that Jim is not going to be at the head of this investigation anymore, but they will continue to do what it is they have sworn an oath to do, and that is to pursue this and other investigations to the full extent.
I mean, Amy Jeffress, I don't know if you heard this, but Leon Panetta was just telling Judy Woodruff that he thinks that this firing and the way that it was handled just has undermined the credibility of the probe, and that any subsequent FBI head is going to face similar pressures from the White House. And he's arguing, in essence, that a special counsel, special prosecutor is what's needed to really get this thing done.
They have certainly strengthened the arguments for a special counsel. I absolutely agree with that. I would not have said that that was necessary before the events of the last 2 days, but I think that firing Director Comey made that argument much stronger.
And Frank Montoya, would you agree with that as well? That this, I mean, yes, the Attorney General, the deputy in the FBI said today he thinks internally it can go forward, but many other people argue someone from the outside has to do this.
Well, it will go forward internally. I mean, the question now is there's so much of this that is public. And so we're talking about not public trust in the FBI, but in the integrity of the investigation. And so I think that that's where the argument is going now. I would also add that if there is a special counselor, prosecutor picked or selected, that it would be FBI special agents who would be conducting the investigation for him.
Amy, what do you make of the idea that if there is a new FBI director who is put into place, that the political entanglements just can't really be undone, that the pressures are going to be too great?
Well, it's going to be very difficult for whoever takes that position. But I also worry that we are focusing perhaps too much, and perhaps we have overly high hopes for the FBI investigation and the Department of Justice investigation, because what they're doing is a counterintelligence investigation. The purpose of it is really to advise the intelligence community about what happened and what can we do to prevent this from happening again. What did the Russians do? What techniques did they use? How do we block them from attacking our democracy in this way in the future? And so a lot of what they do is going to remain classified. They're not going to be issuing a public report at the end of the day telling the American people, here's what happened, we want to explain it to you. That's really not what the Department of Justice does. That's why I think there is a very good reason for Congress to continue with its investigations, because I think they will have a greater role in doing that, in reporting to the public about what happened. And I think the public needs that at this point.
All right, Amy Jeffress, Frank Montoya Jr., thank you both very much for being here.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now we try to explore how President Trump's firing of James Comey has divided Republicans with Steve Deace. He's a popular conservative radio talk show host in Iowa, and David Avella. He's chairman of GOPAC. It's a Republican political action committee devoted to both national and state races for office. And welcome to both of you to the program. David Avella, I'm going to start with you. What's your assessment of the president's decision to fire James Comey and how he handled it?
The president didn't have a choice. There's a term in the military called combat ineffective, and James Comey had become combat ineffective. That he had become a political punching bag. And gosh, for most Americans, it was causing whiplash. One day Republicans were for him, and one day they were against him. One day Democrats were for him, one day Democrats were against him based off what he was saying in any given press account that he did. Secondly, and there were plenty of media stories about this last fall, about how FBI agents and the bureaucracy at the FBI didn't trust him any longer about the way he was handling the investigations. And so he had become ineffective inside the building, and he was a political punching bag outside the building. The president didn't have a choice. He had to get rid of him. And let's keep in mind, the FBI director serves at the will and pleasure of the president. When you don't have the president's confidence anymore, you're gone.
Steve Deace, how do you see, what's your assessment of the president's move?
Well, I agree with David's analysis of why this had to be done. It was hilarious watching John Podesta at 5 o'clock on Tuesday, talk about what a terrible person, or I'm sorry, at 11 o'clock on Tuesday, talk about what a terrible person Comey was, and then at 5 o'clock, suddenly this was Watergate and Comey shouldn't be fired. So I agree with David's analysis of the hypocrisy here, but the execution and how this was done undermines the White House's own cause, Judy, and even if you buy into what to wild conspiracy theories, and even if you agree that most of the media is liberal, and I do, and would like to see Trump fail, he can't play into that, and he does this systemically. You can't have Sarah Huckabee on day 2 of her tryout, essentially, to replace Sean Spicer, contradicting everything she said on day 1. You can't have the vice president 7 times yesterday say that they got rid of Comey on a recommendation from the deputy AG, and then have the president go off and do his own interview with Lester Holt, where he said, I was going to get rid of him irregardless. I mean, they have to understand, even if they believe everyone's against them, then you have to understand the environment you are in, and you have to plan accordingly. They often don't, and they often help to feed these narratives that work against them.
David Avella, what about Steve Deace's point that the way the White House has handled this is what's hurting them?
It may not be the way Human Resource Manuals 101 suggest handling things, but the best way a president can see how he is doing is based off midterm elections. And next year, voters are not going to the polls to cast their votes based off James Comey getting fired or not fired. They're going to base their vote on, are there more jobs? Have we been kept safe? The 2 reasons why President Trump was elected in the first place.
What about this Russia investigation, though, David Avella?
Judy, I defy any member of the media or any Democrat to find 10 voters who were influenced and impacted by the alleged information from Russia that they received last year during the election, and the first 9 can be liars and say they did. We're not going to find 10 people who were influenced by what they heard last year about Hillary Clinton. She was mid to 40s in her approval rating in January before the election. That's where she was on Election Day. Voters' opinions of Hillary Clinton didn't change through the election.
Be that as it may, Steve Deace, what about the credibility of that investigation? How much does that matter to this president?
Well, I think the last election proved really that I don't know that how much Trump's credibility really matters to most voters that would even consider voting for him, especially last year, Judy, when the proxy for the other side was maybe the most dishonest politician of her era. And for Trump, I think it comes down to this. Everything David said there is right, but you get to a point where the lack of execution gets in the way of you actually delivering on your promises. And right now, they're trying to ram through a health care fix that doesn't repeal Obamacare, that 26% of Americans like. We're not sure what the tax reform proposal is going to look like. I mean, they've got to actually get to doing the things they promised the American people they would do. If they do those things, then as the people showed in the 1990s when we went after Bill Clinton, if the economy is great, and I've got jobs and my wages are doing well, then I really don't care what your character is. But if things aren't going well, then suddenly I care, and I care a lot. And this White House needs to actually start governing. And Judy, I'll just give you one quick example before we went on the air. Trump trolling Rosie on Twitter, you know, that is funny when the economy is growing at 4% and 5%. It's petulant and immature when it's not. They've got to govern and just stop the consistent trolling and reality show and actually govern the country, Judy.
Talking about Rosie O'Donnell, David Avella, respond to what he said. And also, I want to ask both of you as we wrap this up, what's going to determine whether the White House gets back on an even keel in the short term or whether things just continue to seem to be in turmoil?
In this environment, it's hard to define what even keel will mean. And there will always be, there's very strong feelings about this president on both sides. But what are they going to judge his legacy on or his presidency on? Are we getting results? Are there going to be more jobs? And look, there is much discussion, even amongst, and Steve mentioned it, even amongst conservatives, oh, we're not doing enough. We are a few months into this administration, and there are plenty of examples, particularly at the state level, where GOPAC focuses, where maybe a Republican governor in a legislature, when they first enact something, it starts out unpopular, but then when people start seeing the actual positive results, those governors, those legislatures are reelected overwhelmingly. And if President Trump delivers on the positive things that he talked about, more jobs, safer Americans, he's going to be reelected.
And you're saying it doesn't matter about the Comey. The Comey incident won't matter in the end. Steve Deace, what's going to determine whether things stabilize, seem to get back on track, or remain, I'll use the same word, in turmoil?
Judy, when I used to do sports talk radio, what I would find is that if the team's quarterback ran afoul of the law, but he had played well in his last game, most fans didn't care. But if he had played poorly in his last game, suddenly they wanted him disciplined, and the program needs to stand for something bigger. I think that also applies here. If he governs well, if they get results, then I think most people will say that's just Trump being Trump, and frankly, a lot of the same people that don't like him, I don't like either. But if this is the substitute for governing, if this is what they do instead of getting results, if they have nothing else other than this reality show, then I think in November of 2018, you will see that rubber band snap back, and it will do so with extreme prejudice.
Steve Deace, talk show host, joining us from Iowa. David Avella from GoPack here in Washington. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
In the day's other news, President Trump signed a pair of executive orders addressing two of his key priorities. One aims to strengthen the federal government's cybersecurity. White House Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert said that will help protect the nation's critical infrastructure from attacks.
The trend is going in the wrong direction in cyberspace, and it's time to stop that trend and reverse it on behalf of the American people. We've seen increasing attacks from allies, adversaries, primarily nation states, but also non-nation state actors, and sitting by and doing nothing is no longer an option.
President Trump's second executive order established a bipartisan commission to review claims of voter fraud in the U.S. Mr. Trump has alleged, without evidence, that 3 to 5 million people voted illegally in the 2016 presidential election. The city of New Orleans today removed a statue of the President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. It is the second of 4 Confederate monuments slated to come down. In the dark wee hours of the morning, workers wearing bulletproof vests and helmets removed the statue from where it has stood since 1911 as protesters cheered. There was no advance public notice of the operation due to threats of violence against the removal crews. There is word that the Trump administration is considering an expansion to a ban on laptops in the cabins of all U.S.-bound air flights from Europe. The ban was initially imposed in March to cover 10 airports in the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey. It was put in place over concerns that a concealed bomb could be installed in laptops and in other large electronic devices. In India, 24 people died overnight when a wall collapsed during a wedding celebration. 28 others were injured. It happened in a town south of New Delhi. The 80-foot wall gave out during a powerful dust storm, trapping guests inside the wedding hall. It's the latest in a string of building collapses in India, largely due to shoddy construction. Young people with the HIV virus now have a near normal life expectancy thanks to improvements in antiretroviral therapy. That is according to a new study published in the Lancet HIV Medical Journal. It found that young HIV-positive adults are living a decade longer than they did 20 years ago. Researchers attribute that progress to new and less toxic drugs and better screening and prevention. The U.S. Senate has overwhelmingly confirmed Robert Lighthizer to be the next U.S. trade representative. He'll play a critical role in renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement, among other things. Lighthizer served as deputy U.S. trade representative in the Reagan administration. And stocks fell on Wall Street today, dragged down by losses in the retail sector. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 23 points to close at 20,919. The Nasdaq fell 13, and the S&P 500 slipped 5. We turn now to an overlooked story, why some men are not pursuing certain types of jobs that are mainly held by women. Our economics correspondent Paul Salman has the story. It's part of our weekly series, Making Sense, which airs every Thursday on the NewsHour.
Mr. Bragg, castle.
Okay.
Mr. Bragg, can I help you?
Sure, it's up to you.
Yeah.
Out back of their classroom in Columbia, South Carolina, 4- and 5-year-olds are building a fortress with their teacher, Mr. Jamie Browder.
Look, Mr. Browder.
I like it. Oh, that is a cool bridge. Browder is that rare bird, a man in a woman's world of work. an early childhood teacher in a profession that's been a measly 2 to 5% male for years, is desperately looking to up the percentage. Meanwhile, so many male jobs in industry have gone poof, 5.7 million since 2000 in manufacturing alone, that deindustrialization has become a stock explanation for Rust Belt resentment, even the election of President Trump.
I agree with the fact that America should be American first.
And I think Americans should have first opportunity on jobs.
And in fact, the share of working men ages 25 to 54 has fallen dramatically since 1957, fully 12% having dropped out of the workforce entirely. So why aren't there more Jamie Browders? Betsy Stevenson has a wry answer. Manly men don't want to do girly jobs.
So if you look over the last 20 years, we've lost 5 million jobs in manufacturing and gained 9 million jobs in education and health services. So we're more than making up for the jobs we're losing, but the characteristics of those jobs, the identity associated with a worker who holds one of those jobs, the pay associated with those jobs are different.
Different by cultural stigma. And that's true of jobs in home health care, nursing, and early childhood education, like the job Jamie Browder has had and loved for 13 years. So I asked him, why don't more men go into this profession?
I think it's a lack of information, a lack of understanding how you can contribute to the children's lives, a lack of understanding what you mean to a community.
So men see jobs like grade school teaching as low status, low upward mobility.
It's almost like if you enter the classroom, this is where you'll be, and this is where you'll spend the rest of your life.
You're stuck.
You're stuck, and this is the set schedule pay. So you will only be able to move yourself up through additional education, which requires money, and then also by just each additional year.
So you can't have a fantasy about striking it rich, you mean?
No. And I think that's almost somewhat anti-American.
Professor Stevenson's answer is more gender specific.
I think they feel stigmatized, like they're going into to do girls' work. These are jobs, they're good jobs, but at the same time we need to recognize that there are a lot of guys who feel either because of their friends or their community or because of themselves, like when they take one of these jobs, that they are doing something girly. And that feeling, is a barrier for them.
S-O. Do you know what that says?
So.
Excellent. Terrific reading there.
Now, not all men feel this way. I once taught kindergarten, and Jamie Browder obviously wasn't hindered by the girly work stigma. But in fact, says Browder, being a man is a key asset for fellow teachers.
Because I think you offer a different perspective. They want to see what a man would say because there's a lack of men in that particular school, say our school right here. So how do you see this? What should I do in these situations?
A different perspective, what diversity so often brings to the table. Also, as a male in the classroom, Browder gets to be a gender role model for boys at a formative age.
Very few times I can remember when there was actually a female student brought to me and said they need a role model.
But with Browder, it's a regular occurrence. So shouldn't more men do as Browder does and buck the stereotype? Economist Nancy Fulbright isn't so sure.
That question makes it sound too simple, as though if guys could just get over their social norm obsession, they could really go out there and get a good job and make the economy better. And I think that's a kind of silly proposition.
Look, says labor economist Teresa Ghilarducci, the stigma of women's work has a basis in reality.
Female-dominated jobs are stigmatized because they're lower paid. If we're going to attack patriarchy and stigma of women versus men, then we should attack it on an economic basis and use that old-fashioned idea of comparable worth, bring up jobs that women have to the same level of the equivalent jobs or comparable jobs that men have.
Now, like the rest of us, Browder wouldn't turn down a raise, but he says...
I think there's an underestimation of the pay.
How much do you make?
Over $50,000.
And you have summers off?
And summers off, and also take on additional work to gain additional income.
And Browder's wife also works, lifting them well into the top half of American household incomes and very comfortably middle class in South Carolina. So again, what's keeping men away?
I think it's also helped that I've had professional development, tons of reading about how do you approach children when they're exhibiting challenging behavior, they're needing your help. And what comes through in all of those readings and professional development is two inner spaces being calm. You know, you have to be calm. You will de-escalate a situation if you remain calm.
Browder's point is that he has loads of education compared to most American men, barely 1 in 3 of whom gets even a 4-year bachelor's degree.
Are they willing to go through the training, you know, pay for the education, the continuous recertification? Are they ready to undertake all of these steps to get to this space?
But to Betsy Stevenson, our cultural definitions of gender roles play a bigger part in keeping men away, and not just from pre-K classrooms.
You know, when we think about things like home health care aides, people tend to think of that as a very female job. But in truth, that's a job that is about physically lifting, moving, restraining people, and those jobs require, you know, great physical strength. That you could imagine a different culture where we said, oh, those are jobs for men.
Stevenson isn't blaming manly men for not doing girly jobs. She just wants to change the connotations of manly and girly, or ditch the adjectives entirely. But that will take time, says Jamie Browder, which means we should focus on the next generation.
Let's look at our young boys and say, instead of trying to enforce this masculinity onto them, let's start to look at different ways of being. Let's look at being able to show them and give them opportunities to be the nurturers. Let's put them in places where they can really take care of others. And I think that's where the work, in my opinion, should come.
Because the men right now aren't going to be going into this profession.
I don't think so.
Because it's too much work, too predictable, too much preparation.
Right. Not enough mobility.
And it's not manly. Yes?
I look at this as very manly. You know, this is the work that men should do.
But the stereotype is that it isn't.
The stereotype, yeah.
In Columbia, South Carolina.
Sorry, I'm busy. I'm working on building a castle with bricks. Talk to you later.
Economics correspondent Paul Salmon reporting for the PBS NewsHour.
Great story. And in an upcoming Making Sense, Paul profiles a star second-grade teacher who is fighting the manly man stereotype, both inside the classroom and out. Now, another in our brief but spectacular episodes where we ask interesting people about their passions. Tonight, we hear from artist and poet Jess X. Snow, who uses her art to help her overcome a speech impairment.
My parents, they grew up in a government in China that had a lot of censorship. And when I was discovering art for the first time, I felt like there was a door that opened in my family and ancestry, and I could be the first person to tell our story without the fear of censorship. I felt like me reclaiming my voice in the U.S. and overcoming my stutter created a doorway into being able to share my family story to the public. I would get bullied a lot in the classroom, and people would finish my sentences for me. Through my art, I was able to see myself overcoming my stutter. I found a community of poets of color when I was in college, and that was the first time I was able to share my poetry on a stage. When that happened, I just stopped stuttering. Imagination is daring to love what is not in front of us. So what then is immigration if not imagination given a destination. Migration is magic. Of course they are afraid of all who possess it. A lot of my work is inspired by the idea that migration is natural, and I just think a border drawn upon the Earth's skin is extremely unnatural, and when people's families and lives are policed by borders, the result is that young immigrants grow up feeling like their identities are divided and they have to give up like their homelands, they have to give up their connections to their families. Maybe I will have a stutter for my whole life, but regardless, I'm able to accept it, because to be an artist is to create a home for yourself in your work, regardless of how many times your identity has been split, whether by immigration or a speech impediment. My name is Jessak Snow, and this is my brief but spectacular take on why migration is natural.
And Jess, we're cheering you on, and you can find a link to Jess's latest short film, Migration is Natural, on our Facebook page, and additional brief but spectacular episodes on our website, pbs.org/newshour/brief. And that's the News Hour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again right here tomorrow evening with Mark Shields and Ramesh Ponnuru. For all of us, the PBS News Hour, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by BNSF Railway and with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.